Hello, my name is Rob Woods and welcome to episode 17 of the Fundraising Bright Spots podcast. This is the show for anyone who works in charity fundraising and who wants ideas for how to really enjoy their job, raise more money and make a bigger difference. And if you're searching for ideas to strengthen your relationships with supporters or to help them connect with your cause at a deeper level, then I think you'll find today's episode really interesting, because today we're looking at experiential fundraising. By this, I mean creating an event or some other way of supporting that includes an experience that makes it easier for supporters to get an insight into your cause. Obviously, it's possible for someone to attend a pub quiz or fun run and hear inspiring stories. But what if the fundraising proposition itself makes this kind of connection to your cause more likely to happen? For this episode, I was delighted to be able to talk to Gornall, an outstanding fundraiser who is the Director of Fundraising at Centrepoint. I was keen to talk to Di to find out about their very successful Sleep Out event. From the outside, it makes sense to me that a charity addressing homelessness should be doing so well through an event that involves supporters spending a cold night outside without the comforts of home in the middle of November. But I wanted to hear Di's perspective on why it works so well and how she makes sure it's not disrespectful or tokenistic, and to see if there are some insights that can be applied to charities with a completely different kind of cause. I really enjoyed hearing Di's take on how to make experiential fundraising work, and I hope that you do too.
This episode of the Fundraising Bright Spots podcast is brought to you by the Bright Spot Members Club. As a practical alternative to one-off conferences and courses whose impact can fade all too quickly, the Members Club is an online resource that gives you ongoing access to a whole library of video training courses, monthly coaching webinars and live training events. It's all designed to help you learn, enjoy your job and raise more money. To join the 300 fundraisers already in the club, or just to find out more, go to brightspotfundraising.co.uk.
Well, hello Di Gornall, how are you?
Hello, I'm very well. How are you, Rob?
Very well, thank you. It's the end of another busy week, but I'm very well, thank you. And I'm ever so excited to be talking to you on the podcast. Thank you for making time for it. Just before we move into the key content, I just want to, for the listeners to understand your role. So you and I think we first worked together when you were at what was then Arthritis Care. You were Director of Fundraising there, and then that became Versus Arthritis, but now you're Director of Fundraising at Centrepoint. Is that right?
That's right, and I've been there just over 18 months, something like that, so still feels relatively new, believe it or not. Yeah.
So one reason I was really keen to talk is we spoke the other day, and I was so pleased for you and the team. It's still a relatively difficult fundraising environment out there, and I gather that you and your team at Centrepoint should be very pleased with yourselves because income is growing. Congratulations.
Thank you.
And in particular, I wanted to spend this podcast thinking about the concept of experiential fundraising. I know experiential marketing is a new buzzword out there, but what I really mean by this is if there's something about your event or your fundraising proposition which in some way links and is relevant to your cause or your charity more than something more generic like doing a marathon or having a bake sale. And in particular, I was interested in your Sleep Out and how well that's doing, and your thoughts about why it might be doing so well, and what the listeners could learn from that, the concept of making things really fit between the fundraising proposition and whatever cause they're at. So initially, how is your Sleep Out going? How is the most recent one?
Yeah, great. So back in November was our last Sleep Out. We had 6 events across the UK, 2 in London and 4 outside of London. And across the board, we're seeing an increase in gross income. Not across all events, but across the portfolio, we have seen income rise and at a reasonable rate, 8% across the portfolio. We had some additional costs this year. We had additional competition in the marketplace, so that did take a hit on net, but we understand why that is because we had additional costs we needed to manage. So we're pretty comfortable with that. But the gross increase this year definitely makes me believe that this is something we just need to keep investing in and keeping on top of, and being really clear across the UK and those different events, making sure that we really understand the audiences, because one of the challenges but also opportunities is that the events attract different audiences. And I think for the purposes of this podcast, worth me talking more about what we do in London and Manchester, which is really a corporate audience where teams come along and take part. And the London one, for example, has been established now for 15 years. So it's had a long time to grow. But nevertheless, we're still innovating within that space. So I think it'll be interesting for listeners to hear a bit about that, which would be good.
Great. And so in a moment, I'd like to unpick why you think this kind of event right now is likely to be more successful for you than events which have no overt link to your cause. But just before we get into that, maybe we can imagine what this event consists of, but at its simplest, could you just state how that event works?
Yeah, so people sign up in the usual way, and what they're signing up for is a night that is essentially an evening, a night of sleeping without the benefit of a bed. They're protected from the very harshest of elements because there is a marquee, but essentially are sleeping on pretty rough terrain without any heating. And they don't leave the site usually until sort of 5 a.m, by which time they're pretty cold and tired. So the aim of the event isn't to mimic rough sleeping, and I think that's really important to emphasise, but it is aiming to bring people closer to the cause of homelessness and trigger people in terms of thinking about some of the challenges that they might experience. So we know, people tell us, one participant was saying how even from the point where she left her front door, she was feeling some of that shame and embarrassment about having her, sleeping bag with her on the bus, the fact that she was wearing quite rough clothes to come in because it can be quite muddy, and not feeling like a professional anymore, feeling very much as though she was in a different part of society from the people that were also travelling by bus and tube and in a very different space. So right from where people leave their front door to arriving at site and then having a tough night and cold night's sleep, I think it really triggers an emotional response in a lot of individuals, which is really helpful for us in terms of then relationship building and then people's longevity with Centrepoint.
So what I find so interesting about that story you've said, and I think this gets to the heart of just why there might just be something so powerful and different to many other fundraising events and propositions, is intellectually she shouldn't be thinking that. She still has a safe home. Mm-hmm. She still has, presumably some level of income. She's not going to be in any danger that evening.
No.
Deep down, she has things that enable one to survive and do well in life. But just the act of, I guess it's just like in a powerful role play, or if any of our listeners do amateur dramatics, just the act of inhabiting a slightly different character for literally a few hours has a weird power to affect a human being and cause them to get different insights and think and feel differently compared to if they just read about it or talk about it intellectually.
Exactly. I think that's absolutely true. And it gives, and people going outside of their comfort zone in that way on that evening means that when people arrive at Sleep Out, they are in a space where they're all slightly outside their comfort zone. They're all slightly uncomfortable. They don't really know how they're going to survive that evening in terms of the cold, in terms of how they feel. And that's brings a great togetherness within that group of people, experiencing a similar discomfort all at the same time, all in aid of, a really amazing cause. Yeah.
And so do you think someone getting involved in this kind of event for you compared to someone, doing a bake sale or doing a fun run or something, have you noticed that extra aha moment and communal, we were uncomfortable, but we did it together? Have you noticed that makes it easier to get people to sign up, or easier to get people to collect sponsorship after the event, or I don't know the level of analysis. Do people tend to get sponsored more for this kind of event than for others? I don't know how much analysis is possible, but with or without the analysis, what's your observation as to the various fundraising benefits? Because it's harder to do this kind of event than to many other things, but why do you think it might be worth it in your case?
Yeah, so the average gift for Sleep Out is not dissimilar to something like a half marathon, let's say. And actually, for a half marathon, most people have to train for months, whereas for Sleep Out, this is one night, which is uncomfortable and outside your comfort zone and slightly disorientating, but it is only one night. So those things balance themselves off, and an average gift comes in at, between £300 and £500 usually. I think, though, the really great benefit for Centrepoint is that during the evening, the people who are there learn a lot about homelessness. The team are going around and talking to everybody, first and foremost, but also we have young people there talking about their experiences, and we have staff who work with young people talking about some of the issues those young people are experiencing. So there's a real emphasis on ensuring that people leave understanding more. I think the other thing that happens is that often very early in the morning, so people have, last November, somebody was talking about their experiences when they woke up and just being so grateful that they had a shower to go to, that they had a home to go to, that they had a purposeful day in front of them. And they were thinking specifically about somebody who didn't have anywhere to go, at best can probably go and keep warm in McDonald's or somewhere like that, when actually, and with nothing to do, particularly between 5 and 8 before the world awakes. So, that period of time is quite challenging emotionally, I think, for quite a lot of people there, where they're thinking about how lucky they are in their lives and actually how challenging that is if you are either rough sleeping or homeless at that point, without a structure to your day that you can really, really get hold of. So all of that together makes this a really brilliant platform for developing longer term relationships, whether that's with individuals, if it's a more community focused event, or the corporate event where we're looking for new business in terms of our corporate pipeline. And what we find is that the conversations that we're having with people who come to Centrepoint who are new is actually, it's really easy to get a follow-up coffee. They're there, they're team building, they've got their team around them, and you go up and you thank them for being there. You're hoping that they have a really, really interesting and experiential night, and that we would love to speak to them and have a coffee in the new year. Is that possible? Can we set a date? And actually it makes that whole conversation really, really positive. Partly because, of course, it's also a very laid back, relaxed atmosphere. Everybody is in, jeans and trainers, and it's not a business meeting where you're having to negotiate that. It's very much a very relaxed environment that you can really have to start developing really good relationships.
Yeah. I gather some of your other events around the country are more community focused and less about the corporate. But if we could just stick with the corporate one for now, is there anything else you've learned or discovered that might help the listeners, even if the event or tactic they come up with isn't so experiential like this, but anything else you've discovered in terms of generating that first cup of coffee, that first interesting conversation with a corporate, anything that your team have learned or they're doing to help increase the chances of getting that coffee, or that when they get to the coffee, how they make use of and refer back to, for instance, the stories. I don't know what it might be, but any discoveries you might think might be interesting to help us get that first coffee.
Yeah, so I think for us, we definitely resource up that night, and we are very clear who we expect to steward whom. And right from the word go, people are stewarded onto site. So when people arrive, a corporate fundraiser usually, but also other volunteers from across the organisation, will actually take those individuals to their sleeping quarters, show them around the site, talk them through the evening, and already start the discussion about next steps. Because actually, if you imagine that you're in essentially a field with a couple of very large marquees, and everybody in November with a woolly hat on and a very large coat, it's actually very hard to know who you should be stewarding later on. And so that very early doors stewardship, when people arrive and you know what organisation they work for, and you know what the next steps need to be in terms of that relationship, those are really key moments when they first arrive to make sure you have that initial conversation.
Yeah. And so, surprise, surprise, one of the keys is just being really organised and getting the detail right of who meets who. Getting that wrong could start a relationship personally or with the charity off on the wrong foot. But working hard to get it right and pay attention to it, sounds to me like it makes all the difference. And then you're starting to get to know people and starting a relationship.
Absolutely that. And I suppose it's worth noting, of course, that then, you need the follow through afterwards. And of course, everyone's pretty tired, but actually the event itself is great. But a lot of the benefit of Sleep Out is what happens next in that corporate domain, and having enough people to then also pick up the phone and follow up and make sure they all happen is really important.
Yeah, I was also really interested that you work hard to make the event as interesting as possible. So that requires work to quite deliberately arrange for people to be there, giving talks, or people who have been sleeping rough in the past, explaining their situation. All of that takes care and hard work to get right. At its simplest, I think for the listeners, I know that not all charities can arrange volunteering opportunities at all anyway, but I know of some charities where they do have volunteering opportunities. For instance, come and sort clothes in our warehouse for our shops or whatever. And I've noticed how often that volunteering experience is really dull and underwhelming. A couple of the charities I've worked with have just worked harder at bringing in someone who knows about the cause to give an interesting talk, or as part of the day sort the clothes alongside you. Seems to me not all of our listeners can have such a perfect match event as you've got, but they can do some of what you're doing, whatever opportunity there, be it marathons or bake sales or whatever. A little more hard work to create storytelling and Q&A opportunities during whatever event it is can go some way actually to making something experiential.
Absolutely, I agree with you. And for us, that's a fundamental part of the evening, actually, in terms of making sure that people really go away understanding more than they did when they arrived about the cause. And actually, without a strong basis for developing the relationship, we would struggle to get those follow-up coffees. So, yeah, that's a fundamental part, really. And I suppose it's worth saying that Sleep Out for Centrepoint is this amazing collaboration across the organisation. So the events fundraising team drive all the logistics for Sleep Out in London and elsewhere, but the corporate team do all the marketing and all the relationship side. And the events team see no money actually from Sleep Out, but we use their skills to drive the logistics of the event. And then obviously within our service delivery functions, working closely with them, we are able to then provide the first-hand stories of young people, have young people there, have some of our frontline staff available to talk to participants and that sort of side of Sleep Out. So it does require quite a bit of internal logistics and handling and really great cross-organisational communication to pull that off. And actually this year, more than any other year, I'd say we did that really well, and the team played a great part in making sure that everyone understood their roles and responsibilities in order to pull it off.
Well done. And such things shouldn't be that hard work, but the reality of the way people and organisations work left to their own devices, I know well how hard you have to work to get all of that communication right. So congratulations on to everyone involved in making it work.
Thank you.
Whether coming out the other side of having to work so closely together with this unifying goal, have you noticed that has helpful knock-on effects in terms of bringing teams together and cross-team communication and so on?
Yes, in particular, actually, the use, thinking about supporter journey. We've definitely got a long way still to go in terms of supporter journey work, but we have started looking at mid-value program, which we haven't looked at before, and that's a direct collaboration, obviously, between our individual giving team and high value, which is great. But also, I think that the relationships are becoming a lot more open. There's more vulnerability there. People are recognizing each other's skill sets for what they are. So with the increased competition, for example, this year, particularly in London and Manchester, we actually relied quite a lot on our marketing team to drive some of the brand changes that we needed. And we relied on the community and events team to do quite a bit of the liaison with Just Giving, so that we changed the way that people were fundraising for Sleep Out as well, so that people could fundraise as teams as well as individuals, so that people could fundraise in the way they wanted to. So there was actually, we've seen an actually really a strong improvement in terms of the way people see their own very, very strong skill sets, but also refer now to others when they see that others have a stronger skill set in some areas, and really maximise the use of those skills to drive the income generation, which is great, actually. Really, really nice to see.
It's so valuable and powerful if we make any progress at all in those kinds of directions. So then I've got a question. I would just like your opinion, really. The truth is, the vast majority of our listeners don't work for a homelessness charity.
Mm-hmm.
So I hope they're finding your experiences and our discussion interesting. But clearly, not every charity can go out and do a sleep out. That would be exactly defeating the point we're trying to make about finding something that fits.
Yeah.
Nevertheless, I wonder if there are some of the ingredients of what you found to make your one fit that it might not be possible for every single cause out there. But if you were to give your opinion or your food for thought on how they might, either in terms of an event concept or some other bit of their proposition, what's your advice of the key elements that they might take from this, even if they apply it in different ways?
Yeah. So I think the key to a successful experiential event is to gain the insight and thought from the widest number of stakeholders you can. So fundraisers are very focused on the money, and rightly so, but there's a very fine line between a really successful experiential event and actually going into a space where actually the cause becomes tokenistic if you're not careful. And that's the last thing you want to risk for your beneficiaries or the audiences that you're supporting. So it's really important that you find that medium, and I think you can only find it when you have a lot of people challenging each other to make sure you get that product as right as it can be in your first year, in your first foray. I would also say, I think, that thinking about year one, as ever, your year one may lose money, and thinking about how you test and learn and what you're going to test and what you're planning to learn in year one is all important, and making sure that your trustees recognise that this is a trial and that you don't expect to make huge amounts of gross income initially, because I think it's very easy to go into a space where if you overpromise and then it doesn't hit its targets, it just doesn't make it to year two, which would be really sad if actually it's showing initial traction in the market, and actually keeping it and seeing what happens in year two could be really positive. So setting expectation, I think, is all important. Yeah.
Yeah. And just on that, is there anything else you've learned about that that testing period, either with this particular event, and any interesting surprises you found, or from any of your other roles, where to increase the chances that the testing initial phase was useful, we learned from it and we kept going rather than give up?
So I think preparation is everything. and do as much research as you possibly can, both in terms of the environment that you're working in, but also in terms of talking to your beneficiaries in particular and those you support to find out how this experience can be really a positive experience for the public at large, or whoever your target audience is. And in fact, on that point, being really clear about your target audience obviously is paramount, but also making sure that you really listen to your focus groups, for example, and you may well want to have a think about how then you position that product to make sure that people can back it. You want people talking about it, you want people promoting it. And if they, for any reason, don't quite feel it's hitting the bill, then they won't feel comfortable doing that. So there's something about really bringing all your colleagues and volunteers and other audiences with you on the journey so they can really talk about it and sing about it and make sure that they're backing it, which would be great. And then in terms of testing, I think for me, the big thing is thinking about being really clear about what you're testing. I mean, we know that there are always instances where things don't go quite how we would like. And then, pushing on the fact we've raised awareness doesn't crack it for a fundraiser. So there's something about being really clear about what we are testing and how we are going to monitor and evaluate that performance. And I think for that, use other colleagues in the sector. You can't underestimate talking to other people who have set up new products in the market, thinking about how they set their benchmarks for success and what they were looking for at that point, and really gaining as much knowledge sector-wide as you can before you start out, because that will stand you in excellent stead. And we know that we're surrounded by some hugely talented people in this sector who have done a lot of new product development before us. So and we know that we like to chat as fundraisers. So let's use that ability to chat and really learn from it.
Thank you. And just before we move on to my last few questions, I just wanted to drop in for the listener a couple of different ways of looking at experiential rather than this kind of event. One I really liked seeing recently online was Hope Locker. I don't know if you heard about that one.
I haven't seen that. That
WaterAid have done, Di, but people can check it out and I'll put it in the episode notes. But the gist is it's a kind of gadget you can put in lockers at swimming pools, and where normally you put £1 into the locker to make it lock and then you get the £1 back at the end. There's some electronic wizardry in there. You put the £1 in and there's a screen which shows that when you come back after your half-hour swim, it gives you really strong stories and messages about during that half-hour swim you will have taken on board some water and it won't harm your health at all. But every minute a child dies somewhere because they drink some water which is harmful. This money can be used to stop that happening. A, you're helping someone connect to the cause in an interesting context. And B, a reason I really like it is you're not having to ask someone for money because they've already put their £1 in. They've already lost their £1.
Yeah, and great, powerful storytelling. Sounds great.
So I don't know in depth about it. I just heard about it, and from what I saw, that in the tests they've done, that seems to me making £22 per locker per week. And obviously, if you've got a bank of 20, 30, 40 lockers, then assuming you can invest in and pay for the technology, that's really powerful. So, and another one I really liked 2 or 3 years ago that the DEC, Disasters Emergency Committee, did was they invited their major donors, mid-level donors, corporate partners, and so on, other stakeholders, to a theatrical experience in a warehouse, and they hired some actors to create an experience for the audience of what happens when an earthquake strikes. And there were various scenes. There was the scene of what happens on the ground, and there's the scene of what happens in the warehousing, and there's the scene of as you're going across on the ship to take the tents out or whatever. And it was immensely powerful, I gather. Well, maybe your version of that is not to go out and hire a playwright and 10 expert actors, but maybe your local college does have a drama course, and there's some students that might like to do something like that as a project for you. So as with so many of the Bright Spot ideas that inspire me, I know that not every listener can do exactly what you've done with Sleep Out, but I hope that something about the idea might inspire them. What essence could they take of what actually is at the heart of why it's working? Similarly, not many of our listeners are going to have access to that budget or, technology that WaterAid are harnessing so effectively, but maybe it could cause us to think of just beyond the normal paradigms and more normal contexts in which we ask for a fundraising proposition to take place, but just think a little, quote, outside the box. Where could something about our cause, the concept of our cause, or what our beneficiaries experience, is there a somewhere in our supporters' lifestyle where we could actually go and help them at some level get an aha moment?
Yeah, absolutely.
How you would respond to that kind of way of approaching this overall topic.
And I think it's worth, from all of those things that you've just mentioned, experiential isn't necessarily about events. I mean, Sleep Out is an event. But if I think about Choose Love, which had the pop-up shop in Soho a year last Christmas, where you could go in and buy virtual gifts for refugees. It was an absolutely, for me, a really uplifting experience to see something so tangible and the storytelling so vivid and the products that I could buy for refugees being so relevant and so appropriate for the work that they were doing. And it was just lovely to see something new and refreshing in that space. And it is hard. It takes a lot of thought and a lot of determination to find a new way of portraying our causes. But hopefully that thinking would enable you to do that, which would be, really great, really great.
So we need to finish fairly soon, Di. Thank you so much for all these ideas. In case people want to get in touch or send some feedback or whatever, are you on Twitter? And if so, what's your Twitter name and or LinkedIn? How could people get in touch?
Yeah, LinkedIn is best. I'm easy to find. My surname is quite unusual. So just find me on LinkedIn and do connect and ask me anything you'd like. That would be great.
Very good. So without more ado, Di, thank you so much. You're as busy as ever at the moment, and you've given up a really big chunk of time to share your thoughts about the sleep night and a whole bunch of other things besides. I really appreciate it. Look forward to catching up again soon. Thank you, Di Gornall. Goodbye.
Thanks so much. Bye, Rob.
Bye.
So there are Di's reflections on what makes Centrepoint's Sleep Out event so important to their fundraising success, and her ideas to make an experiential event or proposition work in other situations. If you'd like to see a summary of these ideas, do check out the episode notes I've put together on my website, which is brightspotfundraising.co.uk. And if you found today's episode helpful, please do share it with your friends and colleagues so that these sessions can reach and help more charities. If you'd like to see a film we made of the full interview, including what Di has learned about making decisions strategically when managing a portfolio of income streams, as well as the broader insights and influences that have helped her extensive career, I've posted the full interview in the Bright Spot Members Club. If you're not a member of the club yet, but you'd like to find out more about how to access this whole library of training resources, coaching webinars and events, you can find out all about it at brightspotmembersclub.com/join. Lastly, thank you so much for listening today. I really appreciate the effort it takes as a fundraiser or a leader to keep on learning, and I hope you found today's session was helpful. Have a great week, and I look forward to speaking to you next week with another Bright Spot interview.